Summerside Armoury has been a landmark on Summer Street since 1911. This year, 2011, is the 100th anniversary of the building, and the information you are about to see and hear was prepared to commemorate its history over 100 years. Let us begin with a review of its original purpose. An armory is a military structure where arms and ammunition and other military equipment are stored. It serves as the headquarters for a militia. What is a militia, you may ask? A militia is a civilian army made up of armed and trained residents of a local area charged with following military orders in time of emergency. Militia members have careers outside of military service and give a portion of their time for defense of their country. Canada has a rich militia history. In the beginning of European settlement in the North American colonies, militias were the key source of protection and defense. The militia story in Prince Edward Island dates back to the days of early French settlement. When the island became a British colony, the militia played a key role in its military protection strategy. The colonial government ordered its male citizens to be well trained and armed and ready to defend the land. Summerside became a militia town thanks in part to the United States Fenians. A Fenian was a member of a secret revolutionary group in the United States and Ireland in the mid-1800s, intent on overthrowing British rule in Ireland. They made numerous cross-border raids into Canada. When the attacks came as close as New Brunswick, Islanders felt a chill go up their spines. The colonial government decided to become proactive and in 1866 ordered the building of drill sheds in each of the county capitals. A drill shed was a building big enough to allow the militia to train indoors as well as to store arms and ammunition. The drill shed built in Summerside proved to be one of the best things to ever happen in the early town. It was a fine building located on Spring Street, and it quickly became far more than a military training facility. The townspeople, in cooperation with the militia, claimed the building as their own and used it for public meetings, lectures, musical entertainments, live theater, and fundraising teas. The drill space was converted to a skating rink in the winter months. A popular event was skating carnivals, which people attended in elaborate costumes to skate to a live orchestra. The drill shed was also the site for many years of the annual Prince County exhibition. Imagine the sorrow of the townspeople when the drill shed was destroyed in the Great Fire of October 10, 1906, which swept through the town of Summerside, destroying 155 buildings. However, the public was confident the Dominion government would replace a building of such importance as the drill shed, and steps were taken the same month to move ahead with a replacement. Mr. C.B. Chappell, a well-known and respected island architect, drew up plans for a combined armory and drill shed, but nothing happened for quite some time. In the fall of 1908, a location on Summer Street, just south of the post office, was chosen as the site of a new facility, and the drill shed land was sold to the town for use as a park, now known as Memorial Square. It is interesting to note that the land on Summer Street was sold to the federal government by J.E. Lafergie, the brother of the sitting member of Parliament A.A. Lafergie. The buildings that existed on the new site were moved or torn down, the cellars were filled in, and the landscaping was carried out, all the while citizens pondering when their new drill shed would be built. However, national circumstances were influencing the situation in Summerside. Starting in 1902, the Federal Department of Militia and Defense had become serious about the importance of the Canadian militia, which had been underfunded for years. More units were organized throughout the country, training became mandatory, and the British-made Enfield rifle was purchased for arms. Storage for these expensive arms was considered very important. Since many militia units had no armories or were housed in inadequate drill sheds dating from the mid-1800s, a national building campaign for approximately 360 buildings was implemented. Summerside was now on that long list. One of the architects with Public Works, Thomas W. Fuller, set about to plan unique and handsome structures for this building campaign. He saw his completed designs as works of art, but this outlook proved to be expensive. This didn't go over well with the Minister of Militia and Defence, who countered with an order for a sensible building program for small communities considered to be rural. Much to the dismay of the town, Summerside was considered to be in that category. While many people in Summerside were upset with the small armory being built to replace the drill shed, Mr. Fuller, the architect, had his own opinion.
I know the people in Summerside were not happy with the armory structure being constructed in 1911. They wanted a drill shed and felt they were receiving less than they'd lost in the Great Fire of 1906. A newspaper of the time, the Agriculturalist, upon hearing the news, remarked, "An armory without a drill shed is about as valuable as the play Hamlet with Hamlet left out." But I've learned there are many ways to look at an issue. As the designer of the new armory, I would like to present my thoughts on the subject. I must admit that I was not entirely happy with the situation either when the Department of Militia and Defence insisted on a simplified building, something 30 feet square to be built in small Canadian communities. As a junior architect with the Department of Public Works, I had big ideas for designing militia buildings to be constructed across the country. You see, I was following in the footsteps of my father, Thomas Fuller, who'd helped to design the Parliament buildings in Ottawa. The people in Summerside would be familiar with his work in the design of the post office. So needless to say, I had high standards, but I was able to adapt and work within the guidelines presented to me. And I would like to argue that I kept my high standards even in the scaled-down building. Now, my plans called for a 2-story brick structure to be constructed on a cut stone or concrete foundation with brick walls and decorative stonework, which I felt gave it some architectural interest. The ground floor was designed with a large assembly area, a commanding officer's room, and 3 other rooms, one of which was equipped with cupboards for the storage of arms. The second floor had a large lecture room and 2 storerooms. The basement, with above-ground windows, had washrooms, fuel and furnace rooms, and additional storage space. All in all, it was a practical but attractive building suited to its purpose. Numerous buildings of my design were constructed across Canada between 1908 and 1911. In fact, the people of Summerside were fortunate to receive one of these handsome stone and brick buildings which I had so thoughtfully designed. For when the Department of Militia and Defence took away all responsibility for armory design from the Department of Public Works and transferred it to their own engineer service branch, many communities wound up with the unadorned, basic, functional drill shed produced in 1912. So you see, there are other ways of looking at the issue.
The contract was awarded in October 1910 to a local contractor, M.F. Skierman and Company, but excavation for the 38 by 34-foot cellar did not begin until June 1911. The 2-story structure was completed by the following summer, and the formal transfer from the Department of Public Works to the 82nd Regiment took place June 22, 1912. The Board of Officers consisted of Captain T.H.E. Inman, Captain G.B. Wright, and Lieutenant A.R. Brennan. Patrick Mulligan was appointed the first caretaker of the building. Once the new armory was handed over to the militia, the dissent in the community quietly disappeared. During the years between the burning of the drill shed and the construction of the armory, the militia had been located in quarters on Central Street. The No. 3 Company of the 82nd Light Infantry Regiment, also known as C Company, had its first annual drill in the Summerside Armory starting late April of 1913. The men trained twice weekly and in the summer participated in the annual training camp in Charlottetown. The Summerside Armory was also home to members of the 36th Prince Edward Island Light Horse, which traces its origins back to 1901. It would seem there was some pressure on the new B Squadron, organized in 1914, to live up to an impressive reputation. The PEI Light Horse was described in the Summerside newspaper, The Agriculturist, as having the finest record of any cavalry regiment in eastern Canada, and it is earnestly hoped the new squadron will maintain the record of their regiment. Men responded to the call to enlist in the militia, and by July of 1914 there were 229 men of all ranks and 201 horses in the provincial regiment. Joining the militia and taking part in training exercises is one thing, but going to war quite another. The men of Summerside and area suddenly found themselves called upon to fight a real enemy when World War I was declared on August 4, 1914. The Summerside Armoury took on a new and urgent role. It immediately became the recruitment centre to sign young men up to fight with the Canadian Expeditionary Force. Over the course of the war, many more enlisted in the 105th Battalion that was raised in Prince Edward Island beginning in December 1915. In the early days, the recruits were determined and eager to fight for king and country.
We are at war with the Kaiser of Germany. I can't say I know much about him or his country, but I, for one, am enlisting to fight against his army. This building here, the Summerside Armoury, is the place to sign up. I should have no trouble enlisting for the infantry, as I have all the requirements asked for in the newspaper ad. I'm over 5 feet 3 inches tall, with a chest measurement of at least 33.5 inches. I have good eyes and, as far as I know, a good heart. Since I'm under 21, I had to get my parents' written consent. It wasn't easy, but my father convinced my mother it was my responsibility to fight for king and country. The good thing is I'm not married, so I didn't need my wife's consent. But if I were, she would receive a $20 a month separation allowance. I want to sign up in the early days of the war, for it said it'll be over by Christmas, and I want to get there. Many members of the B Squadron of the militia, who are training out of the Summerside Armoury, are of the same mind. The first recruits are shipping out for training at Valcartier in Quebec on the 26th of August 1914. So why am I so anxious to go fight for the King of England? I can give you a few reasons. British tradition still dominates in Canada, and we are loyal to the old country. And though Canada is still a very young country, we want to prove that she is strong and able. Fighting in this war will of course be doing the work of God, who is surely on the side of liberty and peace. Plus, the recruitment ads are saying that fighting in this war is a chance for a bit of adventure and to see Europe. How else could a guy like me ever get a chance to go there? I've experienced so little here on the island. A big trip for me is coming into Summerside once a year. And to be honest, I'm tired of the long, grueling hours working on my father's farm, season after season. Canada is paying her soldiers big wages. As a private, I'll receive $1 a day and 10 cents a day field allowance, as well as all the good food I can eat, a uniform, and a kit said to contain more than most people own. Sounds like a good deal to me. I believe in doing my part for king and country. We'll defeat the enemy, restore liberty and peace, and please God. I'll make a little money, see some of the world, and be home by Christmas. I need to see Major Emmett at the Summerside Armoury building and get myself signed up.
For a time in 1915, the Armoury was so busy with military activity, the Red Cross women had to move down the street to the Summerside Town Hall, where they were given the free use of the council chambers. When things settled down, they returned to the Armoury and continued their contribution to the war effort in a quiet and persistent fashion. Another group of ladies that supported war work was the Abegout chapter of the Imperial Order of the Daughters of the Empire. It was organized in Summerside in 1915, and several of its first meetings were held in the Armoury. Members of the group used fundraising activities to support their good works. An IODE at home, held in the Armoury in late May of 1915, gave community members a chance to purchase tea, sandwiches, and cake for the price of 15 cents. While enjoying the tea, the participants could take comfort in knowing that they were doing their duty to help the men fighting overseas. Being able to see recruits training on the Armoury Square behind the building brought the war closer to home for the people of Summerside. At first, it was just straightforward drill training, but by 1916, trenches were constructed to simulate conditions on the war front. They were built along the same principles as those on the firing lines, with dugouts for shelter from shells and loopholes for viewing enemy positions. What the recruits didn't have were the rats, vermin, and stench of the battlefield trenches. Fencing muskets were issued and dummies were constructed for bayonet fighting. Practice was carried out daily and became a spectator sport for the people of the community, who were referred to in the local paper as the gallery. The Armoury building was sometimes used during this period by the Prince County Patriotic Recruiting Society. The society was made up of established and respected community men who carried out a well-organized recruiting campaign all over Prince County. Men were encouraged to answer the call to arms, and many were made to feel ashamed for not stepping forward. As the Great War extended from months into years, the need for new recruits became even greater. Military and public pressure came down heavily on the eligible men still at home to do their duty. Reluctantly, some of them made their way to the Summerside Armoury.
I've never been inside the Summerside Armoury before, but in the next few minutes, I have to gather my courage and go in. Inside's a recruiter who's signing up men to fight in what's being called the Great War. This building is a long ways away from the battlefields of Europe, but it is my first step in getting there. It's become a local symbol of the Canadian war machine that gathers up young men of this country and ships them off to fight and possibly die for a few yards of mud in Europe. Not sounding very patriotic, am I? Don't get me wrong, I love Canada. And better still, I love my island. But I have no great loyalty to the old country of Britain, nor do I feel that by signing up will I be serving God. And no, I'm not looking for a way out of here. I like the small, quiet town of Summerside. I have a job that I enjoy, a woman who loves me, a loyal family. I have a good life here. I don't see violence as a way to solve issues between nations. But I understand the passion of the men who rushed to sign up, not knowing what waited for them on the battlefields of Europe. The war that started in August of 1914 was not over by Christmas of that year. The months have become years, and those eager recruits have become scarce because of stories of carnage in the trenches that have been making their way home in soldiers' letters. Stories of poor food and sanitation, disease, lice as big as mice, and rats feeding on both the dead and the living. The great adventure has lost its glow, and there is little glory. And for those of us not eager to go, the recruitment campaign has turned to one of shaming. It matters not where I go. All eyes are condemning. The newspaper's full of editorials and remarks about fit young men not going to war. Slackers is one of the nicer things they call us. Parasites one of the nastier, and cowards worst of all. It's come to the point where I can't even stand on the street corner without someone passing a rude comment about my not enlisting. Even in church on Sundays, the clergy are sermonizing about the call of duty and serving God in this great cause. My mother's obviously a rarity when she asked me not to go to war, because right there in the paper are mothers pointing sons toward the recruitment office with the caption, "Go, it's your duty." The latest solicitations are meant to cut through a man's heart and strike at his worth. In big bold letters it says, "Are you holding down a job a woman can do when your king wants you to work for him?" So I concede. Today, I'll walk through these doors and sign the recruitment papers. I have no idea what the future will hold for me, but regardless of what it is, I'll be seen by the world as a man willing to do his duty.
The cogs of the war machine turned quickly. The first recruits from B Squadron gathered at the Armoury in August 1914 to leave to fight for the Empire. Friends and family of the enlisted soldiers came for the send-off. The town's mayor, A.C. Saunders, gave an inspiring address and then presented each man with $5 from the town council. The provincial government contributed the same amount. The boys looked fine in khaki uniforms with yellow facings, and a local photographer, Mr. L. H. Reed, took a group photo to display in his studio window. Canada, the island, Summerside, was at war. And it wasn't just men that were needed. Women, as yet denied the vote, were being called upon to assume work roles previously denied them. But they were also called upon to share their domestic and handicraft skills. For with war comes suffering from both soldiers and civilians, and needs are basic. The Summerside Journal published notice for all ladies interested in the Red Cross Society to meet at the Armoury on September 2nd, 1914, and to bring scissors and thimble. 40 ladies of all ages and backgrounds turned out for that first meeting and formed the Patriotic Society for Red Cross Work. It was demanding work, as those who signed up were to discover.
I never had much interest in learning the domestic arts of sewing or knitting. But my mother insisted that they were the essential skills of every good woman. Now I am glad that she fought my reluctance and taught me how to sew a fine seam or knit a warm sock. For you see, our country is in the Great War, and the Red Cross is calling upon us women to help them deal with the sick and wounded. I know that the labors of my hands may ease suffering or give warmth in the frigid cold. As the weeks go by, more women are joining us here at the Armoury as it becomes obvious that the war will not be ending quickly. We meet every Wednesday and Friday afternoons with as many as 30 to 40 women at work and 7 machines running. We make bandages, hospital nightgowns, pajamas, wristlets, nightingales, and cholera belts. The cholera belts are to be made of flannel and placed around the soldiers' stomachs, where they will keep the area warm and thus cut down on bowel sickness. We also knit balaclava caps, scarves, and socks for the soldiers. All of these knitted items are sorely needed by our fighting men. When I can close my mind to the purpose of my afternoons here at the Armoury, they are in fact pleasant, purposeful hours spent in the company of other women. But news from the war front weighs heavily on our minds, especially those of us who have fathers, husbands, or brothers overseas. At the first of every meeting, we read letters that we've received since the last meeting, and often share the sorrow of learned deaths. But our purpose keeps us strong, even when we see the new recruits training in the drill square at the back of the Armoury. We fear for their safety, but take pride in their patriotism. The war shows no sign of being over, and the needs of the Red Cross are growing. Our hours at the Armoury are not enough, and it is suggested that we work at home as well. This is an especially good idea for the women who live outside of Summerside, and collection days are held on a regular basis. In a recent drive for woolen socks, over 400 pairs were gathered in an afternoon. Many women are involved in this work, and the Red Cross Society reminds us often that we play a very important role in providing comforts and necessities for our brave men at the front. We know they are giving their all for us, and that is why we try to live by the words, "Don't weary in well-doing."
The community of Summerside began to take interest in using the Armoury building and grounds following World War I. Starting in the early 1920s, Chautauqua was relocated from the school grounds to the Armoury Square. Chautauqua, named from the first program held at Chautauqua Lake, New York, was a North American cultural phenomenon in the early 20th century. It was a non-partisan, non-sectarian system of education, entertainment, and recreation for adults and children presented through various cultural mediums. Chautauqua trains crossed the United States and Canada, reaching millions of people in communities that would otherwise never experience such diverse culture. The coming of Chautauqua to the Summerside Armoury for several years in the 1920s caused considerable excitement in the greater community. One Summerside newspaperman promoted Chautauqua as always clean, one that one's wife or children can witness. Wanda Wyatt, a young socialite in the 1920s, wrote in her diary about the wonders of Chautauqua.
Chautauqua Week in Summerside is the best week of the year. I've just been making a few notes about it in my journal for today, July 10th, 1924. The Armory Square has been transformed into a carnival-like atmosphere with the big white tents. The militia has been most gracious to give over their drilling square for the hosting of Chautauqua. The central location of the Armory is so inviting to the whole community. I'm pleased to be able to say that my father, J.E. Wyatt, is one of the citizens willing to be a guarantor to bring Chautauqua to town. Not that it's any gamble for them, as the event attracts people from all over Prince County and Queens. Chautauqua offers entertainment and culture for everyone. The season adult pass costs $2.50 plus tax, but I'm going to make every penny of it count. This is the week that Summerside comes alive with entertainment and culture from all over the world. There are lectures, readings, concerts, dramas, and demonstrations. People are being educated and they're not even aware because they're so pleasantly entertained. On opening night, I listened to the Blue and White Marimba Band, an organization of Guatemalan musicians. And then Noah Belraz gave wonderful character impersonations. My parents went to hear Private Pete, the young Canadian war veteran, speak on the inexcusable lie. In the morning, I went to see the Russian Cathedral Sextet, which delivered all of the warmth, passion, and color of Russian folk songs and sacred hymns. I chose the sextet over the talk entitled Well Dressed on a Moderate Income. And then I went to see the Welsh orator, Mr. A.W. Evans, give his witty address, Uncrowned Kings. He compared Napoleon Bonaparte, who destroyed over 2 million people for personal glory, to Louis Pasteur, who discovered the germ theory and has saved untold millions, and asked who is better known of the two. As soon as I have my lunch and have a short rest, I'm going to return to the Armory Square to see the comedy drama Applesauce and the Versatile Ladies Quintet. My sister Dorothy has already seen them and says they are indeed quite versatile, and they sing classical and popular music. Tonight, I'm going to see the magic show, and if possible, Judge Bale's discussion on morality. There's so much to see and absorb. I really want to get my money's worth. There sure is no doubt that people need a lot of stamina for Chautauqua.
When the Great War ended in victory for Britain and her allies, islanders went back to picking up the threads of pre-war life. The role of the Summerside Armory shifted. The recruiters were gone, as well as the Red Cross and other community groups working for the war effort. The trenches behind the building were filled in and the square brought back to a parade ground. The hustle and bustle of the wartime effort was gone and the militia regrouped. A branch of the Great War Veterans Association was formed in Summerside in June 1919 and secured a clubroom in the Armory for the use of the returned soldiers. The GWVA had formed in Canada in 1917 with the objective of ensuring veterans and their families were properly looked after. In the newly created clubroom, furnished with chairs donated by the local community, the members of the Summerside Association could gather with each other and know that even if no words were spoken, a shared experience was understood. The branch played an important role in the erection of the Soldiers' Monument in 1922. In 1926, the National Great War Veterans Association joined with other groups of veterans to form the Royal Canadian Legion following the Armistice Day Parade in 1930. A group of local veterans gathered at the Armory to discuss forming a Legion branch in Summerside. They received the branch charter on May 31st, 1931, and continued to use the Armory building for their meeting place. It wasn't long before the veterans realized some assistance from their wives would be most helpful. They requested the woman to carry out a poppy campaign in 1934. The ladies decorated grape baskets with red crepe paper to hold a number of uniquely designed poppies and took to the streets. They raised $195, an impressive sum of money in a depressed economy. The next spring, a large number of women met at the Armoury to organize a ladies' auxiliary branch of the Canadian Legion with a motto of service. Throughout the 1930s, the Armoury was the home base for their important work. A founding member tells the story best.
I always say, if you want something done, ask a busy woman. The founding members of the Summerside Legion came to that conclusion when they saw the wonderful results we wives and some of our daughters achieved when we helped them with the Poppy Drive in 1934. Seeing a need to serve our men, and in particular the disabled veterans, we decided to organize ourselves. We met here in the Armoury in March 1935, and we elected our first executive of the Ladies' Auxiliary Branch of the Canadian Legion. That was 4 years ago now. Shortly after they came back from the war, they gathered here in the Armoury to share their stories and support one another, and a local branch of the Great War Veterans Association was formed. Other men all across the country were gathering as well, and in 1926, the Royal Canadian Legion was formed. The local branch received its charter in 1931, and we were not long in following, and I'm proud to say we received our charter in 1938. We take the work of the auxiliary very seriously. Not only are we helping our own men, but all those great war veterans who might be in need. Our meetings, which are held here the last Tuesday of every month, are busy with the planning of social events and charitable causes. These social gatherings keep the veterans involved in the community and raise the necessary funds for the work of the Legion. We hold card parties, carnivals, rummage sales, dances, and pantry sales. Our hard-earned funds are carefully channeled to many charitable causes. Some of these have been the Anti-Tuberculosis League, cancer research, and a local dental clinic. But the needs of the veterans and their families are always foremost in our minds. Some of them have struggled in the past few years because of the Depression. So we have bought milk, clothing, and coal for families when necessary. Now, in 1939, the news from Europe suggests that we are on the verge of another world war. If Canada becomes involved, then we can expect that our sons will be asked to fight. This is truly worrisome, but we will do what is necessary as we have in the past. I suppose we will have to find another place to hold our meetings if the military starts to prepare to recruit soldiers. The Department of National Defense will need the use of this whole building, but we will follow the Legion men wherever they gather in the future.
In the 1920s and 1930s, other activities of a social nature took place at the Armouries. In July of 1926, the Summerside Quoit Club officially opened its grounds on the Armoury Square. The Summerside Club had been in existence for some time and had previously used other locations in the town. Quoits is an ancient Greek game from which horseshoes likely evolved. It consists of throwing metal rope or rubber rings over a set distance to land on a pin. Quoits was described by the local Pioneer newspaper as a friendly game in which participants could forget their earthly cares, rest from their labors, and build muscle and general health. Members in the Summerside Club were limited to 40, with a list of interested names kept for when vacancies opened up. Many members of the community enjoyed watching the quoit competitions. The Summerside Rifle Club held its meetings at the Armoury. The club was formed in 1903 as a result of an initiative that came out of the Boer War, which had ended a year earlier. The federal government decided it was important for Canadian men to be proficient in shooting a gun. Thus, they made rifles available to interested individuals and groups. The club members practiced first at a range in the West End, then at the East End of Summerside, and finally, after 1914, were able to use the 50-acre Summerside Rifle Range established at the West End by the federal government. The Boy Scouts in Summerside held their meetings in the Armoury for approximately 4 years, 1931 to 1935. All patrol leaders and scouts were requested to be punctual and regular in attendance at the meetings. And of course, first and foremost, the Armoury was serving the militia. The 82nd Regiment had been renamed the Prince Edward Island Highlanders in 1927, and C Company trained in Summerside along with B Squadron of the PEI Light Horse. Highlights of militia training noted in the Summerside press during the 1930s included drilling, signal courses, and gun training. An interesting account of C Company in 1935 reported that a sand table had been constructed in order to show how physical features of countryside could be utilized in actual warfare. It was also noted that every handler of a Lewis gun was being trained to take down and assemble the gun while blindfolded, and new recruits were showing a keen interest in the work of the militia. Activity continued in and outside the building. Each year, C Company of the PEI Highlanders and B Squadron of the Light Horse left Summerside to attend annual camps for intensive training with other militia groups. The Light Horse Squadron organized a Vickers machine gun troop in 1937 and was very successful that same year with its signal troop, which made an excellent showing in inter-regimental competition. The year 1939 brought the start of World War II, and once again the Armoury was pressed into service as a recruiting office. The early days of the war marked a flurry of activity at the Armoury. The recruiting staff knew the routine because World War I was still fresh in many minds.
Being here in the Army in 1940, I often remember the day I came here as a young man to enlist as a soldier in the First World War. I was naive and eager to answer questions about my suitability to serve in the Army. Little did I know what awaited for me in the trenches in Europe. But I did my duty for King and Country as was expected of me, and was one of the fortunate ones to come home. Now here it is, years later, I'm back in the Army, but this time as a recruiter. The state of war was declared by Britain September 3rd, 1939. This time, Canada decided to enter the conflict on its own and declared war on September the 10th. But it was a foregone conclusion that they would follow the lead of the mother country. And many young Princess County men didn't even wait for the official declaration. As soon as Britain made the announcement, the eager ones rushed to the Summerside Armoury to enlist for duty for King and Country. In 4 days, over 200 young men enlisted at the Armoury in Company C of the Prince Edward Islander Highlanders and went off to Charlottetown for training. This was before war was even declared. It has been 22 years since the end of the last war, and another generation of young men are deciding to sign up for military service. The Great Depression of 1930 caused great financial hardship to a lot of families, and they struggled to find employment. The promise of a regular paycheck, even from military duty, brought dignity to many young men. And the Canadian forces paid well. Even a private was making $1.30 a day. And besides, the young never change. They still see war as an adventure. Yes, they may be going off to war to serve their country, but they're also getting away from home and seeing Europe. After having first-hand experience, I'm no longer naive. But they tell us that this conflict of arms will be different than the last one. They say military warfare has become more civilized, and there will be less loss of life this time around. But I, for one, cannot see into the future, and only time will tell how the story unfolds.
After an initial rush to sign up, enlistment numbers began to decline, but the need at the front was still great. The recruiting office came out with ads that described the dilemma of whether or not to sign up as an awful question to decide, a question perhaps of life and death. But it was also a question of honor. Would a man stay at home and watch others go? The Summerside newspapers carried stories of new recruits having some harmless fun at the expense of young men about town who had suddenly developed serious physical defects calculated to disqualify them from wearing khaki. As the need for recruits grew, the Armoury would witness something never before seen in Canadian history. Women were called upon to join the military service, and young Summerside and Prince County women crossed the threshold to be recruited in order to serve King and Country.
Canada is now years into the war effort. Islanders are still doing their part in signing up. I'm fortunate to be recruiting out of the Summerside Armoury, because this is a part of the country where people really want to join in the war effort. I'm proud of that. and also the fact that the islanders recruited have the highest standing in the nation in terms of physical fitness. Since 1941, we've been recruiting for the Air Force as well as the Army in this building. The Air Force is drawing a lot of attention. The young men see it as the most romantic and adventurous arm of the military. Of course, having the RCAF station just outside of town is an inducement. Those who wish to join the Navy need to go to the recruitment office in Charlottetown, and if my sources are correct, few men in this area are doing so. After the initial surge of enlistment, men started to hold back, and a nationwide recruiting campaign was begun in May 1941. Perhaps it was because the recruiting ads at first politely requested that men come forward to get into step with the boys overseas. In later ads, the shaming words from the last war have been brought into play. A lot of slacking and skulking on the sidelines. We are now actively recruiting women for all three branches of the military. This makes a great change from the last war. The idea being that women could fulfill the jobs now being held by the young men, and the servicemen can go to duty in the front lines. Every time I recruit a young woman, I often think what her experience will be like. I'm proud of our recruitment numbers here in Summerside. Islanders serving in the military are bringing good money into the province. Some $6 million was brought in 1941. But when I have a young man or a woman standing in front of me giving their particulars, I don't see them as revenue generators or even as soldiers. I see them as someone's child. Their average age is about 20. And I feel sorry for the families whose youngsters will not be coming back. And even those who do will be changed forever. There is talk of conscription by the Dominion government. But I don't think islanders will ever have to be bribed or begged to do their duty. In fact, the national numbers for March 1944 show that Prince Edward Islanders lead all the other provinces in the rate of enlistment. Why, some families in the area have given more than one recruit to the cause. Families with surnames such as Gallant, McNeil, Inman, Durant, McGinnis, and the list goes on. Yes, islanders are doing their part. Not only in enlistments, but in the home front appeals for rationing and salvage, as well as raising money in the victory loan campaigns. Although I'm a military man, I can't wait for the day that I walk out of the Summerside Armory into the beautiful island air and know that I will never again come in here as a recruitment officer. That day cannot come soon enough for me.
The period of the Second World War was a busy one at the Summerside Armoury. Recruitment was carried out on a consistent basis. Men were sought for all branches of the Canadian Active Army, while women were advised to travel to Charlottetown to join the Canadian Women's Army Corps. Recruits, both male and female, signed up for the Royal Canadian Air Force at the Town Hall. When the number of Reserve Army members dropped in 1943 because many had joined up for service overseas, there was an urgent call for men too old for active service to sign up in the local 17th Reserve Armored Regiment. The age limit to participate in home defense was 50. Older men were also recruited for the Veterans Guard. The Veterans Guard was made up of companies of men who had served during the First World War and were willing to act in home defense. A photo of some of the members of the Veterans Guard who served in Summerside during 1941 and 1942 was taken in front of the Armoury building, which was presumably the headquarters of the officer in charge. The citizens of Summerside demonstrated their patriotism and support for the war effort by taking part in the victory loan campaigns of the Second World War. The first of 7 campaigns opened in June 1941, and Summerside showed its enthusiasm. Many homes and businesses, as well as public buildings, including the Armoury, gave evidence of the support. The Summerside Journal reported, "The Armoury is among the best decorated local buildings. 2 pennant streamers stretch from the muzzles of the 2 guns on the lawn to the peak of the building. A giant 'Let's Finish the Job' banner is draped across the front of the building." An interesting event took place in the Armoury Square in November 1943 for the Aircraft Detection Corps, which was established in Summerside in the fall of 1942. During the war, the federal government took measures to train civilians to spot enemy vessels and aircraft, as well as to look for any of their planes that might be in trouble. To demonstrate to the public the work of the Corps, a searchlight demonstration was given by the 21st Anti-Aircraft Regiment of Halifax. A large crowd gathered and was suitably impressed when a plane from RCAF Station Summerside was caught in the spotlight's powerful beam. Another countrywide organization that was formed for wartime preparedness was the Air Raid Precaution Program, known as the ARP. It was established in Summerside in December 1941 and was supervised by a committee comprised of leading individuals throughout the town. Major T.H.E. Inman of the militia was in charge of drilling the volunteers in the Armoury Square, and on at least one occasion the building was used as a first aid station during an air raid drill. During the war years, the Armoury was the home to a group of air cadets, which was organized locally in December 1941. The teenage boys used a room in the building as headquarters and carried out drilling at the high school. The purpose behind the Air Cadet Corps was to create a great body of uniformed, disciplined, and instructed young men better equipped to become good and useful citizens in times of peace as well as in war. When the Air Cadets were reorganized under the sponsorship of the Summerside wing of the RCAF Association in December 1950, the squadron became situated at RCAF Station Summerside on the outskirts of town. In 1945, 60 boys in Summerside signed up for the Sea Cadet Corps. The Armoury served as their meeting place. The boys were trained in the skills of seamanship as a precursor to joining the Navy. The Corps strove to instill in the boys the characteristics of loyalty, obedience, honesty, and foresight, among other things. In the 1950s, they began meeting at the facility of the Summerside branch of the Royal Canadian Legion. With the ending of World War II, attention returned to the importance of the militia and its role in Canadian communities. The Prince Edward Island Light Horse and Prince Edward Island Highlanders joined together to become known as the Prince Edward Island Regiment, and Summerside became home to the Sea Squadron of the 17th Reconnaissance Regiment. The Armoury in Summerside, although always kept in good repair, was considered by the militia to be old and out of date, and surprisingly, National Defence Headquarters in Ottawa agreed. Numerous armories across Canada were in need of replacement. Early in 1946, the federal government announced new armories were to be built in both Summerside and Charlottetown. However, there was a but attached to the announcement. The armories would have to wait until the national housing crisis was dealt with. Building starts across the country had been low throughout the Depression and the war. With the return to Canada of the enlisted men, many of whom were of marrying age, there was a great need for low and moderate income housing across the country. The years went by and no new armory was ever built in Summerside. The militia continued to make do with what they had. It appears that the presence of the Reserve Army in Summerside was not uppermost in the minds of local citizens either. An editorial in the Summerside Journal newspaper in July 1952 noted the attitude displayed by the community by stating, "It is often difficult for the officers and non-commissioned officers to keep up their enthusiasm in the face of public indifference and sometimes official apathy." It went on to say that even though Summerside was now considered an Air Force town, the Reserve Army unit needed support in the form of recruits and in a general public awareness of the training carried out by the members of the local squadron. On February 2, 1955, the Summerside Town Hall was destroyed by fire. Permission was given by the militia for the town office to move to the Armoury building. However, it was a short-term arrangement of less than 2 weeks due to the schedule of the militia and the fact that the Armoury did not contain a safe, a necessary part of doing business for the town. Hardships struck the town again in January 1956 when a devastating ice storm wiped out electrical power and telephone service to a large portion of the town. The Town Council and the Red Cross Disaster Committee met by lantern light in the armories to discuss how to handle the situation. The committee went on to establish an office in the building in order to provide necessary relief to many citizens during the emergency. Over time, the armory land grew smaller in size. In the 1950s, the town purchased a 20-foot strip bordering Summer Street in order to widen the street, and then in July of 1961, the town bought a large section behind the armory for the site of a new fire hall that was completed in 1962. Since the armory was considered unsuitable for civil defense purposes, the new fire hall was built with a fallout shelter in the basement. In 1962, the local militia's hope of a new facility was reinvigorated when the town entered into negotiations with the federal government to acquire the armory for use as a police station. However, nothing came of those negotiations, and the militia continued to occupy the building. In May 1958, the PEI unit had been redesignated the Prince Edward Island Regiment, RCAC, indicating its role as a Royal Canadian Armoured Corps. And in 1968, the Summerside C Squadron was renamed B Squadron. As the years passed, many young men of the area were trained as reservists in and outside the Armory building. In 1984, the Armory was designated a National Heritage Site. A Journal Pioneer newspaper editorial commented that it deserved the classification of a heritage site because of its role in the life of the community over many years. But its role as an active armory for the militia was slowly coming to an end. The closure of Canadian Forces Base, Summerside, in 1991 presented an opportunity for the militia to have the use of a building with plenty of room for drilling. They consequently relocated in Slemon Park, where they are still housed in 2011 under the name of Reconnaissance Squadron of the Prince Edward Island Regiment.
Today is the end of an era. The B Squadron of the Prince Edward Island Regiment will be moving from this armory, a place the militia has called home for some 81 years. The flag will be taken down at 11 a.m. on this 13th day of June, 1992. And 2 hours later, it will be raised at number 64 Slemon Park, the supply building located at the former Canadian Forces Base just on the outskirts of town. Our 40 members have much mixed emotion. The new location will have 33,000 square feet of accessible space. We've wanted a drill hall for probably every year for the 81 years we've been in the armory. But the new location doesn't have the character of this old brick structure, nor does it have the history seeping from its pores. This tidy structure on Summer Street has stood witness to an amazing transitions of military equipment and procedures. The early men who were trained here used horses as a part of their defense strategy. Today we use Army Jeeps. The arms are very different, as is our military strategy. The uniforms are not even close to what they used to be. I think about the early recruits and how surprised they would be to learn that the militia, once a man's world, now welcomes women amongst their ranks. But over the span of time, we share in one common militia experience: a desire to serve and to defend our country as capable, trained militia persons. The militia has played a prominent role here in Summerside. With the high profile of the armories near the downtown, many young people were drawn to become involved, and good opportunities and great life experiences were found to open up for them. Numerous young men and women now credit the militia for helping them become upstanding, contributing members of our society. We are leaving this old historic property, but the memories of the militia within its walls will live on in the community. We will not be as visible to the public as we once were, but they will be comforted to know that we are still on duty. We don't know the fate of this old armory. It is now in the hands of Public Works Canada. It is our hope that the building will be well cared for over its continuing lifespan and continue to proudly serve the citizens of Summerside.
As a matter of interest, let it be known that when the militia packed up and moved, it took 2 guns that had decorated the front lawn of the Armoury since 1913. Now these guns, which were even old back then, had been presented to the town if it would pay for the railway costs to ship them from Charlottetown to Summerside. In the following years, whenever the guns started to appear shabby, the local press would write about the need for them to be painted up and the work would be done. In 1926, they were mounted on concrete bases to keep them from sinking into the ground. The guns remained over the years as part of the federal government military inventory and consequently were moved to their new location with the rest of the squadron's physical assets. The Armoury building did not stay vacant for long. The town of Summerside, located in the former post office just north of the Armoury, was in need of office space and rented the facility from the Federal Department of Public Works. For several years in the mid to late 1990s, it housed the town's Department of Technical Services. During that time, it was used as a location for an episode in the Emily of New Moon television series produced by Salter Street Films. The series, based on the Emily trilogy by island author Lucy Maud Montgomery, aired over 4 seasons in the United States and in Canada. The exterior of the Armoury was used to represent an insane asylum in early PEI. The building next became home to the Department of Recreation and Special Events and consequently served as the planning space for many of the national and international sporting events hosted by the town in the 1990s. The town of Summerside became the city of Summerside in 1995 and a year later purchased the Armoury building for the sum of $151,600. When the expansion of City Hall was completed in 2003, the Department of Recreation was relocated to City Hall, and the police department moved in while renovations were carried out to the police station, which is located on the former town hall land just south of the Armoury. In 2005, Wyatt Heritage Properties, the Arts, Heritage, and Cultural Complex for the City of Summerside, installed the International Fox Museum and Hall of Fame on the main floor of the building. Prince Edward Island was the first place in the world where foxes were successfully raised in captivity, and many fox ranchers became wealthy by selling pelts or breeding stock. In 2007, Gallery 33, an art exhibit space to showcase artists of the community, was established on the 2nd floor. Public art, heritage, and cultural programming take place both inside the building and on the lawn. The 1911 Armoury building, with its quiet architectural beauty, continues to play a central role in the life of the Summerside community.